When I first inherited the farm, the dirt road wasn't even marked on the community map. It wound quietly between two low ridges, hugging the edge of a dry creek bed, before emerging into the main fields like a brown ribbon someone had forgotten to tie. My father called it the old back vein because that road had carried everything: feed seeds, tractors, workers, even his own casket, when we buried him at the oak tree near the hill. It was never a problem. For decades, trucks would use that road during harvest season just a few weeks in the year. The rest of the time it sat mostly unused, a rough but loyal path that belonged to the land more than it did to any zoning map. We didn't ask for permission. Nobody ever did. This was farmland long before the HOA came knocking. I didn't join the HOA. The house I live in sits just outside the official subdivision, but the access road cuts through a corner of HOA-managed land, a forgotten sliver near the retention pond they built for storm drainage. And that's where the trouble started. See, 10 years ago, the HOA was nothing but a few overeager neighbors with clipboards. But over time, they grew. They got more funding, hired a management company, and re-elected the same handful of people year after year until they ran the place like a private kingdom. At the center of it all stood Karen Delaney, blonde, surgically alert, always wearing a lemon-colored sweater and carrying an iPad with a cracked screen. Karen had been president of the HOA for 6 consecutive years. Her power didn't come from force. It came from exhaustion. Most people were too tired to argue, too busy to attend meetings, too afraid of the fines. I kept to myself. I ran my farm. That year, the rain came late. The fields dried slower than usual, but the wheat grew tall and stubborn. By early September, I had a full crew ready. 6 trucks, 4 seasonal workers, a rented grain trailer lined up at the edge of the southern field. I walked the old road that morning like I always do, coffee in hand, boots still wet with dew. I made mental notes of where the tire ruts were soft, where the ditch had sunk a little. It was peaceful, the way things had always been. And then I saw the sign. Bright red staked into the soil like a declaration of war: no through traffic. HOA maintained road. Trespassers will be reported. My heart thudded. It didn't make sense. This road had never been posted, never maintained. I had patched the potholes myself for years. Karen had no business laying claim to it. But there it was, planted in their HOA colors, with the little sunburst logo and all. I remember staring at it for a long time, just stunned. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of a golf cart buzzing down the hill. Karen. She pulled up slowly like she was inspecting a construction site. Her cart was freshly washed, a flag fluttering off the back that said Neighborhood Watch. She didn't wave, just looked at me like I was the one trespassing. "You can't run trucks through here anymore," she said. I blinked. "This is my access road." Karen smiled that infuriating HOA smile. "Actually, it's on HOA-controlled easement. The board voted. Heavy farm equipment violates our noise ordinance." She handed me a printed letter already folded and stapled, pre-prepared. She had planned this. I tried to keep calm. "Karen, this road's been in use longer than you've lived here." She shrugged. "Maybe you should have paved it if you wanted to keep it." Then she drove off. The next day, she chained it shut. A thick rust-colored chain wrapped around 2 freshly installed wooden posts. They must have hired someone overnight. She even padlocked it like it was her backyard gate. I couldn't believe it. The first truck had already arrived. My crew stood there waiting, awkward, uncertain. I had to tell them to turn around. The loss was immediate. You don't pause a harvest without consequences. Each day off schedule meant reduced grain quality, lower prices, longer labor hours. I called my lawyer, but he told me it could take weeks to untangle property access rights through an HOA. Weeks I didn't have. I sat on my porch that night, staring at that narrow road glowing faintly under the moon. I felt powerless. Like my land was being stolen 1 inch at a time, not by some government, not by a corporation, but by a woman with a clipboard and a grudge. There was no courtroom, no trial, just a sign, a chain, and a rule book nobody voted on. But as I sat there in the dark, a different feeling crept in. I'd faced worse than this. I'd rebuilt forward operating bases in the middle of deserts, moved convoys across minefields, negotiated ceasefires under satellite delays. And now, here I was, paralyzed by a woman with a laminated name tag. No, I wasn't going to let that happen. Not again. That night, I pulled the old army box from my shed. I dug out my service maps, land use documents, satellite overlays. I scanned the HOA bylaws. and for the first time in years, I felt that old discipline rising in me again. Not rage, not desperation, but strategy. She wanted a fight. She was about to get one. The letter arrived 2 days later, tucked into a crisp white envelope bearing the HOA's gold-embossed logo. It had that clean passive-aggressive formatting I'd come to expect from bureaucracies that thrived on intimidation. At the top in bold were the words, "Notice of violation. Immediate action required." I opened it at the kitchen counter with a dull paring knife still covered in peach fuzz from canning that morning. My hands were sticky, and the irony wasn't lost on me. While I was preserving food from a failing harvest, the HOA was busy printing paper threats with premium ink. The letter accused me of conducting industrial-scale commercial activity on or adjacent to HOA-managed property, which, according to Section 12B of the Covenants, was a violation of sound traffic and environmental standards. It also referenced ongoing concerns from neighbors about truck noise, dust clouds, and unauthorized use of private roadways. Private, that road wasn't private. Not legally. It was an easement, something my father had negotiated decades ago when the subdivision was built. The agreement was simple. The HOA could build their fancy houses and retention ponds, but the farm would retain unimpeded access to the main road. That language was still buried in county records. I knew it because I'd spent the night digging it out. But Karen knew something else most people wouldn't fight. Most would read that letter and fold. She didn't know me. I placed the letter flat on the kitchen table, smoothed out the creases, and took a picture of it with my phone. Then I walked out to the shed and pulled the farm's original deed from a locked file drawer, along with a scanned copy of the easement agreement my father had stored in a weatherproof container. He had been cautious like that, especially after the city tried to rezone part of the land in the 90s. I wasn't just angry, I was building a case. I emailed the documents to a local land use attorney named Jerome Keller, who had a reputation for being slow but precise. His reply came 2 hours later. "You have a clear right to ingress and egress through the easement, even if it crosses HOA land. Their signage is not enforceable. However, be cautious, they may escalate before we can get an injunction." Escalate. They already had. That afternoon I received a fine. $250 itemized as a special violation fee for unauthorized vehicle staging on common land, my grain trailer. The one parked along the edge of my own field, where it had always sat during harvest. Karen had taken photos apparently, and attached them to the citation as evidence of non-compliance. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about the road. It was about me. Somehow, I'd become a target. Maybe Karen thought the farm was an eyesore. Maybe my refusal to attend HOA meetings had branded me as non-compliant. Or maybe, as my neighbor Dale once said over a beer, she just needs someone to bully. I visited Dale that evening. He lived 4 doors down from the entrance to the blocked road in one of those ranch-style houses with solar panels and a garden full of tomatoes he never picked. He was an ex-cop retired after 30 years on the city force, and he knew a thing or two about neighborhood politics. "She's been itching for a fight ever since they put her back in the presidency," he told me. "She tried to make the mailman walk his route in reverse because she didn't like where he parked. You're just the next thing on her list." I showed him the letter, the photos, the fine. He whistled. "You need to get ahead of this, fast." We sat in his garage drinking root beer and listening to old country songs on a crackling speaker. He told me stories about how power, when unchecked, has a way of rotting good people from the inside out. How HOAs, in his opinion, were just mini-governments with too much freedom and not enough oversight. "You should call Sheriff Morales," he said. "You two served together, didn't you?" I hadn't thought about that in years. I did know Morales, though. We were in the same logistics unit during my last tour. He was quiet but brilliant, always 3 steps ahead during convoy planning. After retiring, he'd gone back to school, got into public service, and somehow ended up the elected sheriff of the very county we'd grown up in. It felt like fate knocking. That night, I wrote him a long email. Not an official complaint, just a reconnection. I explained what was happening in plain language. I attached the HOA letters, the deed, the pictures, and even an old photo of us from our unit's Thanksgiving dinner overseas. Helmets off, smiles, forced but real. I didn't expect a reply that night, but I got one. It was short, just a sentence and a half. I remember that road. Let's talk tomorrow. I've got time around 4. Something shifted inside me. For the first time in a week, I didn't feel like I was alone. The next morning, I watched from the porch as Karen's minions, 2 younger board members with identical polos and clipboards, measured the width of the road and took more pictures. They walked back and forth like surveyors, pretending not to see me standing 20 feet away. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because I had a plan now. A slow one. A legal one. The kind of plan that builds momentum like a freight train, silent at first, but unstoppable once it gets moving. By the time 4 p.m. rolled around, I was standing in the county building, hat in hand, waiting for the sheriff who once navigated war zones with me, and who now held the keys to justice in a war I never asked for. And Karen, she had no idea what was coming. Sheriff Morales greeted me like no time had passed. He came out from behind his office desk with that same easy gait he used to have on deployment, hand-extended eyes, scanning mine not just for formality, but for truth. We hugged the way veterans do, clasped shoulders, one hard pat, no words. Then he motioned to the chairs by the window and shut the door. His office was plain, no trophies. Just a flag folded into a triangle, on a wooden shelf, a few commendation plaques, and a map of the county pinned with colored tacks. I spotted a small red one pinned near my road. "You remember this one?" I asked, nodding toward it. He chuckled. "I remember hauling a busted axle out of that ditch in 2007. We sat. I laid the documents on his desk like evidence in a trial, the easement, agreement, the photos, the HOA letter, and the fine. He didn't skim. He read every line, leaning forward, tapping a pen against his bottom lip like he was building a case in his head. "You're in the right," he said finally. "But she's not going to give up easy." I nodded. "I know, she's escalating." And escalate she did. Within 3 days of that meeting, Karen's war went into full swing. It started with barricades, bright orange traffic cones, and plastic fencing stretched across both ends of the access road, staked into the ground with metal rods. Then came the signs. Not just no through traffic anymore, but new ones printed in bold red font. Farm vehicle access prohibited. Violation will result in towing at owner's expense. She even listed a towing company. Derek's Towing, a local outfit I'd used once to move a tractor. I called the owner, a guy named Mike. He sounded embarrassed. "She said she had jurisdiction," he told me. "Said the board approved enforcement. I didn't know it was your land, man." I told him to stay away. He agreed, but the signs stayed up. Next, she started showing up with her phone. Every time a truck so much as turned into the southern field, Karen would materialize at the edge of the HOA property line, phone raised, filming like she was a neighborhood crusader catching criminal activity on tape. She wore that same lemon yellow sweater even in the heat, her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. The workers got nervous. They were seasonal guys, hard-working, but not used to HOA drama. One of them, a teenager named Tyler, asked me if they were doing something illegal. "No," I said. "She just wants you to feel like you are." But it worked. 2 of them quit by the end of the week. That Saturday, I caught her standing on the hill above the creek bed, binoculars in hand. I walked up slowly, boots crunching over dried grass, and stopped 10 feet away. "You know this is harassment," I said. She didn't flinch. "I'm documenting a violation. The board has authority over my land." She smiled tight and smug. "This is a shared boundary. You don't get to decide the impact on the community." I was silent for a long time. Then I pulled out my phone and started recording. Her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "Same as you," I said, "documenting." She turned away, but not before muttering something about legal consequences. I emailed that clip to Sheriff Morales that night. He replied with one word: useful. But Karen wasn't finished. On Monday morning, I walked out to find the access road chained again, only this time with steel cable, and concrete posts poured in overnight. She had actually hired a contractor. There was fresh rebar sticking out of the base, the cement still drying in the sun. She wasn't just enforcing rules, now she was building a wall. I took photos, close-ups, wide angles, measurements. I even got a picture of the contractor's truck with the company name clearly visible. Then I noticed something else posted to one of the new barricades was a laminated citation from the HOA, fining me $500 for continued misuse of shared infrastructure. That was the moment I knew she wasn't just reacting. She was trying to break me. And for a second, just a second, it almost worked. I stood there alone, listening to the sound of crickets buzzing in the field, the hum of a lone grain truck idling near the barn, waiting for permission to load. I could feel the pressure building. Not just legal, financial, emotional, psychological. This land was more than property. It was my family's legacy, my father's bones under that oak tree, my own scars buried in the soil. Karen was trying to dig all that up and throw it in the trash, but she didn't understand the man she was dealing with. I called the sheriff. This time it wasn't just a courtesy. "I want to file an official complaint," I said. "Interference with agricultural operations, violation of county access agreements, harassment, vandalism." He didn't hesitate. "Come in tomorrow. Bring everything." I spent the night printing files, labeling photos, writing a timeline of events. I included my father's handwritten notes from the original easement agreement, the county zoning maps, and video stills of Karen on the hill. I was done playing defense. The next morning, I dressed like I was going to court. Button-down shirt, belt polished, hat in hand. I walked into the county sheriff's office with a binder under my arm and a hard look in my eyes. And I made it clear. I'm not just asking for help, I'm invoking my rights. Sheriff Morales stood with me in front of a whiteboard, reading every page, nodding slowly. Then he said something that made the hair on my neck rise. "She filed a noise complaint about you yesterday." I blinked. "What?" "She claimed your trucks were backfiring deliberately. Said it was a coordinated intimidation campaign." I laughed, but he didn't. "She's laying a paper trail," he said, trying to flip the narrative. That's when he turned to the map again. His fingers traced the access road. "How soon do you need that road cleared?" 2 days, I said. "Rain's coming." He paused. "Give me 24 hours. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. Because I saw it in his eyes, that quiet look he used to get before we launched something big. Not loud, not messy, just final. Karen had declared war, but she was about to learn what happens when you mess with a man who's been through real ones. The sky hung heavy the next morning, thick with the kind of gray that told every farmer what was coming. Rain. Not the kind that blesses a crop, but the kind that drowns it. I stood at the edge of the field just after dawn, watching as clouds rolled in low and slow like siege towers. The wheat, still standing tall, still waiting, shimmered gold under the flat light, stubborn against time, wind, and now bureaucracy. And yet my truck sat idle. The concrete posts were still there, hardened, now cable, strung tight like a fence in a war zone. My access road was sealed shut by a woman with no title to the land, no grasp of the dirt beneath her painted nails, and no comprehension of what it meant to lose a season. My crew was gone, all but one. Miguel had worked for my father, then for me. Quiet, steady, loyal. He was there when we buried the old man. He didn't ask questions when I told him the harvest would be delayed. He just nodded, parked the truck by the barn, and showed up every morning anyway. But even Miguel had his limits. That day, he came to the porch after lunch and stood by the rail with his hat in hand. "I can't wait much longer," he said. "My cousin's orchard in Ojai needs help. I have to feed my family, senor." I didn't blame him. I nodded, shook his hand, and watched as his pickup disappeared down the hill. Then I was alone. I tried everything. I called the county zoning board, left messages. I emailed the agricultural commissioner explaining the easement, the interference, the damage. No reply. Everyone said the same thing in polite tones. "It's being reviewed." Reviewed. As if wheat waits. I tried to redirect the trucks, but the only alternative route required crossing a neighbor's private bridge, too narrow for heavy trailers. I asked the HOA for a temporary variance. I offered to restrict truck hours to mid-morning, to water the road, to reduce dust, even to install noise shields. Karen's reply came via email, unsigned, cold, and clinical. "The board has unanimously denied your request. Continued attempts to bypass HOA policy may result in legal action." That was the first night I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the calendar pinned beside the fridge, counting days like battle casualties. Every red X was another opportunity lost. I ran the numbers: how much grain would mold if left too long, how many contracts I'd lose, how much credit I'd have to ask from a bank that barely tolerated farmers to begin with. I thought of my father, the way his hands would shake near the end, but how he still insisted on checking every bin after harvest. How he believed that land would always give back if you respected it. I'd done everything right. I'd kept it clean, paid the taxes, fought the pests, rotated the crops. But none of that mattered to Karen Delaney. To her, this was about power. She wasn't trying to protect a community. She was trying to break a man. And for a moment, I feared she might. It started in my chest, a slow, cold pressure I hadn't felt since Kandahar. Not panic, not rage, something deeper. A kind of hollow ache that said, "You might lose this, not just the crop, the place, the purpose, the pride." One night I walked the perimeter of the field in the dark flashlight in hand boots soaked with dew, and I found myself talking aloud to the soil, to the sky, to the ghost of my father. "I don't know what to do," I said. There was no answer. Just the wind brushing the wheat like a whisper. Just the moon silent and far away. The next day the rain came. Hard. The wheat bowed under its weight. The soil turned to soup. The harvest window slammed shut. It was over. I sat in the barn with the doors open, rain pounding the roof, watching thousands of dollars worth of grain rot in the fields. It was like watching your life savings sink slowly into the sea and being legally forbidden from grabbing a lifeboat. Karen had won. Or so it seemed. I didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. I stopped shaving. I didn't check email. I ignored the HOA's latest fine, which now claimed I owed was $750 for soil erosion concerns. Soil erosion. She was fining me for the result of the damage she caused. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so cruel. But on the 4th morning, a familiar engine sound cut through the quiet. A county truck pulled up. Then another. And then him. Sheriff Morales stepped out of his black SUV coat, slung over his shoulder clipboard in hand. He didn't smile, just nodded. "Get your gear ready," he said. "It's time." I blinked. "You serious?" He held up a signed court order. Temporary injunction. Emergency access granted. HOA barriers must be removed pending review. Judge didn't like what he saw. Behind him, 3 bulldozers rumbled to life. The sound shook the air. It was like thunder, but this time, it didn't bring rain. It brought hope. As the machines rolled toward the access road, I felt something break open inside me. Not vengeance. Not even triumph. Just relief. I whispered. "Thank you," but Morales was already walking away, phone to his ear, coordinating logistics like we were back in the desert. I stood at the edge of the road and watched the steel cable snap under the weight of the dozer. Watched concrete crumble. Watched Karen's wall fall, piece by piece. It was over. Not the war, not yet. But the season of silence had ended. And I would not go quietly again. The earth always remembers. That's something my father used to say when we walked the fields. It remembers where you planted right and where you didn't. Where you took too much and where you gave back. And it never forgets the steps of a man who stood his ground. That morning, after the bulldozers tore through the barricades, I stood in the middle of that cleared access road, my boots in the churned-up clay, and realized I was starting to remember too. Not just who I was as a farmer, but who I had been before this life. Before the wheat, the barns, the quiet mornings with black coffee and fence repairs. Before I was a landowner, I was a soldier. And the part of me that had once handled conflict zones, logistics nightmares, and tactical messes had been sleeping for too long. I spent the rest of that day moving equipment. Not harvesters, we'd lost most of that season, but supplies. I restructured the drainage for the lower fields. I graded the road again. I planted clover in the ruined strip beside the retention pond to keep erosion at bay. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't look toward Karen's house. I just worked. Steady, methodical, focused. Because the war wasn't over. The injunction Sheriff Morales secured was only temporary. HOA, Karen still had lawyers. Still had influence on the city zoning board. She could appeal delay, or worse, try to push through a vote to revoke the historic easement entirely. I needed to prepare. So I went digging not in the fields, but in the past. I opened the cedar chest my father kept in the attic, where he stored the old records of the farm, like holy scrolls. Inside were county tax filings from the 70s, correspondence with the original developers, and most importantly, a yellowed blueprint map hand-labeled showing the legal easement cutting diagonally across what was now HOA-managed land. It was signed and notarized. And in the corner, my father had scribbled a note in his weathered handwriting. Never let them forget this road existed before their fences. I felt his presence in that moment, not as a ghost, but as a mentor still teaching me lessons from the grave. I scanned everything into PDFs, made copies, sent them to Jerome Keller, the slow but deadly land use attorney I'd hired. He called back 2 hours later, voice suddenly sharper than I'd ever heard. This changes everything, he said. You have generational precedent, topographical continuity, and assigned municipal acknowledgement of pre-development access. This isn't just an easement, it's a protected agricultural right-of-way. It felt like finding an old weapon buried in the soil. And I wasn't done. I pulled out my old military footlocker, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were maps journals and a dusty binder marked Logistics and Movement Coordination, Afghanistan 2010. I flipped through it slowly, scanning diagrams and flowcharts I'd drawn by hand during missions. I was reminded of who I used to be, a man who moved entire convoys through mountain passes under cover of night with fewer resources than Karen Delaney had in her clipboard. I wasn't just going to defend my land. I was going to expose her. With Keller's help, I drafted a formal claim against the HOA, not just for obstruction, but for damages, financial loss, from the ruined crop, emotional distress, and violation of landowner rights under the county's Agricultural Preservation Act. It wasn't about the money. It was about sending a message. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor anymore. She was a malicious actor, abusing a position of influence to harm a lawful operation, and I had the documentation, witnesses, and legal standing to prove it. At Keller's advice, I also filed a formal complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Commission. Turns out she'd done this before, tried to evict a woodworker for unauthorized tool usage, fined a widow for flying an American flag too high, even attempted to rezone a neighbor's chicken coop as a nuisance structure. Patterns matter in law, and Karen's pattern was crystal clear. I began recording everything. Phone calls, interactions. I kept a log of every vehicle that passed near my land. I interviewed former board members who had quietly resigned during her reign, one of whom gave me access to internal meeting minutes that weren't supposed to leave the HOA's file system. Those minutes were damning. One note in particular stood out. The farmer continues to undermine the aesthetic of the community and must be discouraged. Not collaborated with, not supported, discouraged. She saw me as a blight, something to be controlled or erased. While I'd spent years training to outlast sandstorms and insurgents, a middle-aged suburban dictator didn't scare me. And still, beneath all of this strategic work, beneath the documents and the case building and the military mindset, there was something deeper stirring. Grief. Not just for the crop or the workers or even my father's legacy, but for the idea that a man could live his life honorably, quietly, and still be violated like this. That after decades of doing right by the land and the people around it, he could be told he was the problem. That's what Karen had tried to take from me, not just access, not just harvest, dignity. And so, one night I walked out to the hilltop where the oak tree stood, where we'd buried my father. I sat down beside the rough wooden marker and said nothing for a long time. Then I whispered, "They're trying to erase the road, Dad." The wind picked up rustling the clover. But I've got the maps, I've got the proof, and I've got people who believe me. I looked out over the fields, faded now, but still proud. I'm going to fight Dad, the right way, the smart way. I stood, dusted off my jeans, and walked back down the hill. Tomorrow, I would meet with Sheriff Morales again. And this time, I wouldn't be showing him signs or photos. I'd be showing him a war plan. Sheriff Morales didn't speak much when I walked into his office again. He just raised his eyebrows when I placed the thick binder on his desk. It landed with a satisfying weight, the kind that says, "I didn't just come to talk. I came to win." He flipped through the pages slowly at first, then faster as the contents pulled him in: notarized easement, maps, email threads with Karen HOA, meeting minutes, photos of the barricades, copies of fines affidavits from neighbors, and my sworn statement describing the financial loss from the ruined harvest. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharp. "You've got more than enough," he said. "Keller's filing this. He's already prepping the civil suit," I replied. "But I wanted you to see it before I move forward. If there's a criminal angle, I need your help." He leaned back in his chair, thumb resting on his chin. "There might be," he said. "Karen's tampering with legal access routes, issuing unauthorized fines, building structures without permits on easement land. She's operating like she owns the county. She thinks she does." He nodded slowly. "She's going to fight back hard. I'm counting on it." I didn't smile when I said it, and neither did he. There was a beat of silence between us, the kind that only old soldiers know how to respect. Then he spoke again, lower now. "I've been looking into Derek's towing. Remember those HOA signs that threatened to tow your equipment? Yeah. Well, he said the company's contract with the HOA expired last year. Karen never renewed it. That means she was listing a private business without authorization. That alone's a legal misrepresentation. I exhaled hard, so she's bluffing with everything. Not everything. Just the parts she knows she can't enforce. That hit me like a hammer, not because it was surprising, but because it confirmed what I'd feared from the start. Karen wasn't misinformed. She was manipulative. She knew the law well enough to dance around it, but not respect it. She used fear like a scalpel slicing small pieces from her neighbors until no one dared speak. But she'd made a mistake. She picked a man who wasn't afraid of her. I met with Keller that afternoon. He was already printing copies of the lawsuit packet to file with the county civil court. In bold letters at the top it read, Mason v. Silver Creek Homeowners Association, complaint for damages and injunctive relief. Keller added something else. We're filing for a court order to temporarily suspend HOA enforcement powers over your easement until the matter is resolved. I've also included a cease and desist letter addressed directly to Karen Delaney. What are the chances a judge signs it? With the evidence you've provided, he said, better than good. That night I didn't sleep much, not from anxiety, but from clarity. I cleaned the barn. I organized my tools. I wrote a statement for the press just in case the story went public. I even updated the farm's website, adding a blog post titled, The Road We Fought For. Not many people read it at first, but I wrote it for me and for the land and for my father, and for the people like me who were tired of being bullied. The next morning, Morales called. You'll want to come down here, he said. We've got movement. When I arrived at the sheriff's office, he was already at the printer, holding a set of photos printed from a neighbor's trail cam. He slapped them on the table. Karen. She was in the shots, all right, caught in the act in the middle of the night, walking the edge of my field with a flashlight and a measuring wheel. In one photo, she's seen dragging an orange traffic cone off the roadside ditch and tossing it in her golf cart. Another showed her placing a new signpost near the access path this time, with no HOA branding at all. She's working off the books now, Morales said, trying to mark territory before she loses control. Is that trespassing? He nodded. Technically, yes. And if she's placing signs without HOA approval or city permits, that's another violation. Can we use this? In a heartbeat. 2 hours later, Keller submitted the civil suit and the injunction paperwork. The county clerk stamped it, and the judge issued a hearing date less than a week away. But something else happened that day, too. Something small but seismic. Dale, my retired cop neighbor, came walking up my driveway, with 2 other homeowners behind him. One was an older woman named Cheryl I barely knew. The other was a young couple who had just moved in a few months prior. We heard what's going on, Dale said. Word's spreading. I nodded wary. He continued, a lot of folks are sick of Karen, but they were afraid. Didn't think they had a choice. And now I asked. He reached into a folder and pulled out a stack of signatures. She's up for re-election in 2 months. We've got enough support to call for a vote of no confidence. I stared at the paper stunned. Cheryl stepped forward, her voice quiet but steady. We want to take the HOA back, but we can't do it unless someone stands up first. You're doing that. We didn't want you to think you were doing it alone. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just swallowed hard, nodded, and shook their hands. Karen may have waged her war with isolation and fear, but something else was taking root now, something quieter, stronger, and more enduring. Community. And not the kind you build with rules and fines. The kind you build with truth. The next few days blurred into motion, legal briefings, notarizations, email chains with the Oversight Commission, and neighbors slowly stepping forward. I caught glimpses of Karen speeding past in her golf cart, sunglasses low-mouthed, tight, her posture stiffer than usual. She knew. The battle lines weren't just legal now. They were personal. And as I walked back to the barn that evening, I looked up at the sky and saw the first break in the clouds since the rain. Light spilling over the fields. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The road was open. The truth was out. And Karen Delaney had no idea that the worst was yet to come. If there's one thing Karen Delaney didn't know how to do, it was backing down. The moment she sensed her grip loosening, she doubled down with the desperation of someone who'd ruled unchallenged for far too long. And now that her authority had been questioned legally, publicly, she wasn't just reacting. She was retaliating. 3 days after the lawsuit was filed, I came home to find another violation notice taped to my gate. This one wasn't printed on HOA letterhead. It was handwritten in blue ink, taped hastily and completely absurd. Unauthorized use of agricultural machinery in site of community homes, $1,200. Fine, payable, within 5 business days. I laughed, out loud, a short bitter bark that echoed across the yard. She was trying to find me for being visible. That afternoon, I received an email from a local realtor friend, Sarah, who'd sold a few properties in the area. She warned me that someone from the HOA had been calling around trying to get information about recent farm activity and whether my presence was devaluing the community aesthetic. Devaluing. The word hit me like a slap. Karen wasn't just trying to obstruct my access anymore. She was laying the groundwork to label me as a nuisance property, a term HOAs use to justify extreme actions like forced mediation or, in some rare cases, court-ordered limitations. She wanted to paint me as a problem so she could erase me entirely. But her most aggressive move came the next morning. I woke to the sound of voices low, tense, and clustered around the edge of my access road. When I stepped outside, I saw a construction crew unloading materials near the barricade site. Karen stood beside them, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a foreman possessed. I walked over, slow and calm, boots thudding against the dirt. "What's going on here?" I asked. One of the workers looked at Karen, clearly uncomfortable. "This is private property," I continued louder this time. "You don't have authorization to build anything here." Karen turned toward me with a practiced smile. "We're installing decorative fencing and a community gate. The board approved it last night. Nothing personal." I stared at the stack of materials behind her, poured cement steel posts, chain link spools, and a large metal gate with an electronic keypad. "You're blocking the easement again," I said. "The easement is under review," she replied coolly. "Until then, we're securing our boundaries. You have a court order against further obstruction. I have an attorney." And there it was, the real war cry. Not a chain, not a sign. Just the smug assurance that she could keep outlasting me in paperwork and bureaucracy. "You're violating the injunction," I said. "That's contempt of court." Karen shrugged and turned back to the workers. "Unless you have something signed, today, I suggest you move along. We have a schedule to keep." I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I just pulled out my phone, took pictures of everything, her, the workers, the materials, and called Morales. He showed up 40 minutes later. By then, the posts had been set and the cement was already drying. Karen greeted him like an old friend, but the sheriff wasn't smiling. He stood between us, eyes flicking back and forth like he was calculating something more than just legalities. "She's obstructing again," I said plainly. Karen interrupted. "We're enhancing the community perimeter. With a gate across a legal access road," I added. Morales looked down at the court papers in his hand, then at the cement footings. "Karen, the judge's order is clear. No further barriers on or adjacent to the contested easement." She stiffened. "This isn't a barrier, it's an aesthetic improvement." He stared at her for a long moment. "You've been warned." Then he turned to the workers. "Stop construction. Leave the materials where they are. If you keep building, you're liable for aiding in the violation of a court order." They stopped immediately. Karen turned red, not flushed, boiling. Her jaw tightened, her mouth opened, then shut again. Her fingers clenched around the clipboard like it was a steering wheel in a car she no longer controlled. She spun on her heel and stormed away. The next day, the HOA sent out a newsletter. It was printed on glossy paper, slipped into every mailbox in the subdivision, and written like propaganda. In it, Karen accused a non-compliant neighbor of threatening the safety and tranquility of the community. She warned that legal action was being taken to protect property values and the aesthetic integrity of Silver Creek. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew who she meant. Then came the anonymous complaints. Overnight, I received multiple visits from code enforcement officers claiming to investigate noise violations, improper equipment storage, and even livestock mismanagement. I didn't even have livestock, just a dog and a few hens. It was harassment pure and simple. Morales did what he could. So did Keller. But bureaucracy moved slow, and Karen was playing the long game. Death by 1,000 cuts. A legal grindstone designed to wear me down until I either sold, submitted, or disappeared. And yet something unexpected happened. Neighbors started showing up. Quietly at first. Cheryl brought me fresh bread and asked if I needed help with anything. Dale mowed the shoulder of my road without being asked. The young couple who once ignored me waved every morning now and even offered to help haul tools. Then one night, a group of 10 residents gathered in my barn. They brought folding chairs and casseroles. We sat in a loose circle under the faded American flag my dad had nailed to the rafters years ago. Someone lit a citronella candle. Someone else opened a six-pack. They were tired of Karen, too. She fined us $300 for planting petunias in non-approved pots, someone said. She told my husband his truck made the neighborhood look industrial, said another. We just want to live in peace, Cheryl added softly. And she makes everything a war. That night, we agreed on something bold. A formal petition to recall Karen Delaney as HOA president. We would gather signatures, submit it to the board, force a vote. And this time we'd do it with truth, not intimidation. With law, not laminated threats. With unity, not fear. The tide was turning. Karen had escalated the blockade, but we weren't trapped behind it anymore. We were tearing it down together. It happened on a Thursday morning, clear skies, the air sharp with the scent of clover and engine oil. I was standing at the edge of my field, tying back a piece of ripped shade cloth on the tomato trellis when I heard the low rumble of diesel engines that didn't belong to farm trucks. It was deeper, heavier, familiar in a way that reached back through memory, like the sound of an approaching convoy on a military base. I turned toward the access road and saw them. 3 bulldozers, county issue. Big yellow beasts with black trimmed blades and orange flags tied to their grills. Behind them, Sheriff Morales' SUV rolled up, slow and steady, lights off, but presence unmistakable. And parked just ahead, right where the illegal gate had been half installed, was Karen. She stood with her arms crossed and lips pressed so tightly they'd lost all color. Her golf cart sat idle behind her, like a fallen chariot, its HOA president decal catching the sun like a badge of fading power. The sheriff stepped out first. He didn't speak to her. He walked directly to me. Got the final injunction signed this morning, he said, holding up the document. County judge authorized immediate enforcement. The road is yours. I nodded slowly. So it's happening. It's happening. Morales turned to the driver of the first bulldozer, gave a crisp wave, and stepped aside. The machine moved forward with deliberate grace, its treads pressing deep into the soil like ancient armor, reclaiming territory. The blade hit the base of the concrete posts with a thunderous crack, sending chips of cement spraying like shrapnel. The cable snapped with a sharp twang, recoiling like a serpent cut loose. Karen screamed. Not a word, not a sentence. Just a raw, broken sound, a howl of disbelief, of loss of something sacred, being ripped from her hands. She rushed toward the dozer arms, flailing, shouting words I couldn't fully hear over the roar. Stop, you can't. This is a violation. This is community land. You're destroying community property. Morales stepped between her and the machine, calm but firm. Ma'am, step back. This action is backed by a court order. Karen shoved a paper toward him, some letter probably drafted by her lawyer, but Morales didn't flinch. Ma'am, he said again more sternly, step back. She froze. Her eyes darted between the sheriff, the dozer, and me standing there, arms crossed, unmoving. For a moment, I thought she might actually charge the equipment, but something in her broke. Not visibly, not dramatically, just internally. Like a balloon losing air through a pinhole. She stepped back. The second bulldozer rolled in. It flattened the remaining posts, crushed the fake private road sign into the dirt, and scraped the gravel clean. By the time the third dozer moved, the whole obstruction had been reduced to debris. All that remained was the open road, wide, dusty, and mine. The crews didn't stop there. The county workers laid fresh gravel, regraded the drainage ditch, and even installed reflective boundary markers to delineate the road's legal edge. For the first time in years, the access path didn't just exist, it was official, legal, undeniable. Karen stood by her golf cart the entire time, arms limp at her sides. Her face locked in that stunned silence people wear when they realize the world no longer bends to them. It wasn't anger anymore. It was defeat. Neighbors began to gather near the tree line. At first, just a few, Cheryl Dale, the young couple, but then more. I saw faces I didn't recognize, quiet homeowners, parents with toddlers, retirees with dogs. They stood watching the road become whole again, their eyes flicking between the dozers and Karen. And then, something incredible happened. They started clapping. Not wildly, not like a stadium roar, but steady, warm. A wave of quiet approval for something that had been wrong for too long. I didn't look at Karen. I didn't need to. This wasn't about gloating. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. That afternoon, Morales and I walked the length of the newly cleared road. He handed me a folder with copies of all the court documents, plus an official letter from the county commissioner acknowledging the historic easement and its protection moving forward. "You're safe now," he said. "I know." "Karen's already threatening to appeal." "She can," I replied, "but she'll lose." He smiled slightly. "She's not used to that." "No," I said, "she's not." Before leaving, he stopped and looked back toward the neighborhood. "You know what the difference is between a rule and a right?" I raised an eyebrow. He nodded toward the road. "One is written by a committee. The other's earned with your hands." We shook hands and he drove off. I spent the evening picking up the remaining debris scraps of rebar shattered sign pieces, a mangled chunk of fencing. I piled them in the old trailer by the barn, not out of spite but as a reminder. Not every fight leaves visible scars. Some leave silence, peace, open roads. That night, the stars were bright. I stood on the hilltop by the oak tree, looking down at the headlights of my truck bouncing along the newly opened path. For the first time in months, I felt still inside. Karen had unleashed everything she had: legal tricks, fines, shame, threats, but the land had held. The truth had held. And so had I. Tomorrow, I'd start prepping for next season. I'd already missed one harvest. I wouldn't miss another. And this time, no one, not even the queen of laminated notices, was going to stand in my way. 2 days after the Bulldozers rolled through the petition to recall Karen Delaney as HOA president hit every doorstep in Silver Creek. Printed neatly on white paper, it included bullet points: abusive power, unauthorized construction harassment of residents, obstruction of lawful property access. Dale and Cheryl organized the delivery. I didn't put my name on the petition as an author, but everyone knew where it started. By the end of the first day, 47 homeowners had signed. On the second day, it reached 82. And by the third, the HOA board was forced to schedule a mandatory community-wide meeting, the first one in years, not led by Karen herself. I didn't plan to attend. I was done with showdowns. My road was open, my land was free, and I had work to do. There were rows of damaged wheat I'd decided to plow under and replant with winter barley. It was late in the season, but I needed something in the ground, something alive, something moving forward. But then Cheryl called. "She's cornering people," she said quietly. "Door to door, threatening to fine them for signing, spreading lies. You need to be there." So I put on my boots, washed the dirt from my face, and drove to the community hall. The parking lot was full. Inside, folding chairs lined the walls, every one of them filled. People stood at the back, murmuring, flipping through packets handed out at the door. On the far end of the room, Karen sat behind a table marked HOA Board, flanked by 2 other board members, both of whom looked deeply uncomfortable. She wore her standard lemon-yellow sweater, but something had changed. Her hair, usually sculpted to perfection, was limp around the edges. Her eyes were rimmed in red. Her smile twitched at the corners like it had been stitched into place and was now coming loose. I took a seat near the back. Dale nodded at me from across the aisle. Cheryl was already scribbling something in a notebook, her reading glasses perched low. Then Karen stood. "Good evening," she said, her voice sharp and brittle. "I'd like to begin this meeting by reminding everyone that Silver Creek is a deed-restricted community, governed by covenants that all of you agreed to upon purchasing property." Someone coughed. Another person murmured, "Here we go." Karen ignored them. "Recent events have caused considerable confusion, fueled by misinformation and by certain residents who have chosen to escalate matters instead of working within the community framework." She didn't say my name, but her eyes flicked to me like a blade. "Let me be clear," she went on. "The road in question is under review. Any interference with that process is illegal," a voice called out. It was Keller, my attorney, who had arrived quietly and stood near the rear wall with a file folder under his arm. Karen froze. "Excuse me," she said, trying to maintain composure. Keller stepped forward, calm as ever. "The court has ruled, Mrs. Delaney. The road is not under review. The injunction is in place. The obstruction was removed legally." Karen's face turned white. The board members shifted in their seats. She tried to regain ground. "Well, this isn't a courtroom, Mr." "No," Keller said. "But it's still America. And these homeowners have rights." There was silence. And then someone clapped. It started near the back, just one person. Then another. Then a ripple of applause spread through the room like a brush fire on dry fields. Karen raised her hands in protest, but it was too late. The community wasn't with her anymore. She slammed a gavel on the table. This is my meeting. No, said one of the board members beside her, a soft-spoken woman named Janice, who rarely said anything in meetings. This meeting belongs to the community. Karen's jaw dropped. She looked betrayed. I built this neighborhood, she stammered. I saved property values. I enforced order. Without me, this would have been a mess. Janice shook her head. You turned it into a prison. Then it happened. Karen's meltdown. She rose to her feet, voice cracking. You're all ungrateful. You don't see what I've done. I've kept this place safe. I've kept people like him. She pointed directly at me from ruining our way of life. The room fell quiet. I stood slowly, not out of anger, not to confront, just to rise. I'm a farmer, I said calmly. This land was here before any HOA existed, before the manicured lawns and the speed bumps and the matching mailboxes. And it'll be here long after the last fine is written. Karen opened her mouth again, but no words came. She sank back into her chair, breathing heavily, her hands trembling. A voice from the crowd said, "Let's vote." It was unanimous. The recall petition moved forward that night. The board scheduled a vote within 15 days. Karen was suspended from duties effective immediately pending the outcome. Her keycard access to the HOA office was revoked. Her emails were frozen. Her authority dismantled. She sat there frozen in her chair as people filed past, some ignoring her, others staring with quiet contempt. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She was done. Later that evening, as I walked back to my truck under the glow of the street lamps, I passed her golf cart abandoned at the curb. The decal had been peeled off. Just a sticky residue where her title used to be. I paused for a moment, then kept walking. No need to say anything. Some endings speak for themselves. The first good rain came the night after the vote. Not the kind that floods or ruins or delays. The kind that soaks deep into the soil, rinses off the dust from old wood, and makes everything smell like the earth just exhaled. I sat on the porch in a rocking chair that used to be my father's, watching the water drip from the eaves while my dog snored at my feet. The fields beyond the barn shimmered silver in the moonlight, alive again, despite everything. Karen was gone. The vote had been decisive, 124 to 9. She moved out within a week of being officially recalled. No grand goodbye, no garage sale, no apology. Just a moving truck at dawn and a for sale sign planted in the yard before sunset. Her house sold fast, surprisingly fast. But I suppose even bad roots can feed new beginnings. The HOA board was overhauled too. Cheryl took over as interim president, and the first thing she did was call a community meeting, not to enforce, but to invite. She wanted ideas, feedback, forgiveness. The walls that Karen had built with fines and fear were now being dismantled with lemonade stands, potluck dinners, and handshakes across property lines. But none of that was what hit me the hardest. What hit me was the road. My road. It wasn't just open now, it was respected. The county marked it officially on their GIS maps. A wooden sign was installed at the entryway. Mason Road. Historic agricultural route. I didn't ask for that. Dale and a few others surprised me with it one morning, and I damn near cried right there in the dirt. Then came the idea. Cheryl brought it up casually, like it was nothing. You ever think about doing something with that space near the field, the one by the creek? Maybe a festival? I laughed. A festival. She smiled. We used to have a harvest celebration years ago, before Karen took over. I looked out at the clearing, overgrown and wild, but full of possibility. It used to be where my father kept the old orchard before most of the trees died off. I hadn't touched it in years, but something stirred in me, something warm. So I said yes, and 2 months later it was real. We called it the Silver Creek Harvest Homecoming. Neighbors donated lumber for benches and tables. The high school band played under a borrowed tent. Local kids carved pumpkins and sold homemade candles and cookies. I parked my tractor by the hay maze, and Cheryl roped off a corner for a pet parade. Someone even brought a cider press. But what I remember most wasn't the noise, or the games, or the music. It was the silence at the very center of it all. That quiet, steady kind of peace that comes when you know, not hope, not pretend, but know that the fight is over. That something broken has been healed. That people who were once strangers or enemies, or simply too scared to speak, are now standing shoulder to shoulder, sipping hot apple cider beneath string lights and laughing like old friends. And me, I wasn't just the farmer anymore. I was part of something again. Later that evening, Morales showed up. He didn't wear his badge or his uniform, just jeans boots and a flannel shirt. He leaned against my truck with a paper cup in hand and nodded at the crowd. "You ever think it'd end like this?" he asked. I shook my head. I didn't even think it would end. He smirked. "You ever wonder why I brought 3 bulldozers that day?" I looked at him sideways. Overkill. He took a sip. "Because I knew she'd scream louder than one could handle." We both laughed. Then he got serious. "You did more than win a land dispute," he said. "You reminded a whole neighborhood that they have a voice." "I didn't mean to start anything," I replied. "Exactly," he said. "That's why it worked." Before he left, he handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a formal commendation from the county for preservation of community access and promotion of lawful civic leadership. I didn't read it out loud, just tucked it in my coat and shook his hand. The stars came out in full that night, bright and wide and unashamed. I stood at the edge of the festival listening to laughter echo across the field. Kids ran between the booths. Neighbors swapped recipes and seeds. Someone strummed a guitar near the fire pit. And for a moment I thought I saw my father again, leaning on the old fence post near the barn arms, folded, nodding in quiet approval. I didn't go to him, didn't say anything, just stood still and let the moment pass through me like wind through wheat, because I knew what he'd say. He'd say, "The land remembers son, and so do the people, and now so will I." Because this story isn't about a road or a gate or even a woman named Karen who thought she could own what wasn't hers. It's about standing firm when the world tries to push you out, about remembering that silence isn't peace, and about rebuilding not just with tools and time, but with truth. The harvest will come again. The fields will rise, and this land, our land, will never forget who stood for it.